And even those in their 20s, we believe, have largely gone through educational experiences where they were not necessarily encouraged very much to try things out and to make things, which we think is a problem. And that has to do with control and notions like knowledge transfer, formal methods, instruction, commands, final written assignments, student feedback questionnaires. These are parts of the reality that we are dealing with as teachers and things that were very prominent in the original curriculum when we inherited this. And you may note that especially these aspects of instruction and commands exist at two different levels. They exist at the level of us talking to our students, but once students use tools, in particular digital tools, then there is a second layer where they instruct and they issue commands in their exchanges with their tools. So one key question that we had to ask ourselves initially was, how do we get ourselves as well as our students out of control to the extent that unexpected things can happen? And that brings us to a fairly general distinction between analog and digital that we are using when we are talking amongst the two of us. On our way here, we made a stopover in San Francisco for 2 days, and for the 2 days we made this little exercise of exploring the city in two different ways. On the first day, we used the Lonely Planet guidebook and the city map and the museum map, and we knew from the newspaper there was an Otto Eicher exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, which we saw and were fairly disappointed by. That kind of approach connects known fixed dots with intentional paths that are corrected when there's an unwanted deviation. And you end up with experiences that other people have made before you. And on paths like that, you end up making mistakes because things are right or wrong. On the second day, we started making a little pinhole camera out of a candy box and intentionally got lost in the city. We had no idea where we were going and how long it would take, and whenever we felt like doing so, we just opened the camera and exposed a shot, and thereby created an unrepeatable experience. And images that, for us, having gone through that day, are now very valuable and very unique, and they cannot be reproduced. And a lot of things have happened in these images that we didn't plan. Of course, this is drifting, and this is digital. So some of the questions that we are asking are now, how to drift in a classroom, how to drift with a computer. How little instruction is not enough. There needs to be some perturbation in class, some suggestions as to what should happen. So how little is not enough? How much support is too much? When we're talking about instruction and support, we're talking about a spectrum, a continuum between do as I tell you otherwise on the one end, and on the other side, your wish is my command. Both concepts basically eliminating choices. And the idea is to open a space or a corridor between these two where choices can be made. And that's what we are trying to do. And that happens in a classroom as well as on a computer, again, at both those levels that I mentioned before. And then another question, what justifies satisfaction with learning on our part? What's the criteria by which we can decide that we have achieved something if there's no goal and no intention to a known goal in what happens in the classroom?
We don't, by the way, we don't have answers necessarily. We have the questions, and we, during our teaching and thinking about our teaching, we work towards maybe a tentative answer, but we're not here to present answers. It's maybe something that needs to be said.
Is this what justifies satisfaction with learning? Is that I'm not sure if I understand the question. Is it what
constitutes?
No. Yeah, there's one thing. What does it look like? Right? Is one question that I see in that. But what I thought you meant was what validates satisfaction with learning as a legitimate course of pursuit.
Yes.
It's the second, not
yes.
so much the
yes.
first. Okay, great, thank you.
Do you share these questions with your class?
I think we mentioned them, but not necessarily that explicitly.
Okay.
because these are designers, these are architects, and the subject of our course is much more applied. However, at the end, usually we bring things to a summary, and there these questions become much more explicit, because we're not really applying any theory. We're not doing research in that way in the classroom, but we go through experiences and we go through stories, so that in the end, maybe we might have a discussion with students about this.
I think there's a whole lot that we're not sharing with the class.
So you're not having the same conversation that you're having with us, with your class also?
No, that
this
one we don't.
Okay.
And that includes us not mentioning the word cybernetics, because we don't know what that gets in the way of. Because it could be an intimidating thing. We use the word when we talk to some students who come to us asking certain kinds of questions, but we are not throwing this theory into the face of everybody. The course that we usually take is building on a lot of particular instances of things that we find show-worthy and letting the students connect the dots. Let them make their theory, rather than us presenting a body of theory and then showing, oh, look how it applies here, look how it applies there.
We've done this workshop. This is just a little overview to show you how many of these workshop instances we have already taught. Interesting here is mainly to see we have taught it in Hong Kong, most of it, but then we've also taught an instance in Shenzhen in China. Then Tom went to SDAS in Urbana to teach the same thing. We've also gone to Germany and teach it both at the university and at Tom's former school, which was a very interesting experience, yes. So, and we've got more coming up, so it's evolving at the moment. This is a little bit about the contents we teach. We're not going to go into detail, but we have two levels. We have stories and examples, and we have tools and strategies or methods and theory. So here, for example, you see on the left-hand side, it's the combination book, like an Aristotelian taxonomy of body parts from which you can reconstruct animals. Then based on that, a design strategy called Zwicky Box, where you do basically the same with materials or whatever aspects you want to combine, and mind mapping in the middle as methods or strategies. There's some card decks which are meant to incite creativity. This one, Gardening, Not Architecture, is by Brian Eno, and there's also others who give you suggestions should you get stuck. And then at the lower end, it's transformation from one area or image to another. So it's the Marilyn Monroe chair by Arata Isozaki. Maybe some of you know it, where he used the shape of Marilyn Monroe in this famous photo to construct the shape of the chair. And then to the right, many of you might know it, it's by King Ranulph, in a very visual explanation of conversation and how novelty can come about in such a conversation. And I think especially this one, this type of theory is very interesting because it's visual and quite graspable for students to understand. So that's about the level of theory.
That's
that
only
we go
a
into.
thumbnail of what we show. This can fill 14 weeks. So just to give you a flavor, and we are taking a fairly critical approach to as much as we can. So this is not presented as key methods for the students to use, but as something to consider as strategies that have been proposed before. So when you look at this as a method to create novelty, and then you realize this is actually what you do every time you order pizza, then is it really such a powerful thing? And with this approach, maybe you get from pizza A to pizza B, or from a pizza with onions to a pizza with olives, but you're not going to go from pizza to sashimi or something like that. Maybe that would be more interesting. So the question is, how do you get from pizza to sashimi?
These are some of the stories that we show. They all connect to seeing. Some of you might know, like in science fiction, people dreaming up things, seeing things that then people see and take for real and make the world fit the fantasy. Then some other stories, like for example from art, right below it, Marcel Duchamp taking a urinal, putting it into a museum exhibition, and explaining it by the art is not really based on skill, but is based on the seeing. It's based on the choice made when the artist takes an object and establishes a conversation, a new way of seeing, and takes that to the audience or the viewer.